It sounds almost too simple to be true. The cloudy water left behind after rinsing rice turns into a growth booster so effective that, honestly, plants can visibly surge within just a few days. Yet, gardeners across generations have quietly relied on rice water long before any bottled fertilizers even existed. When used the right way, rice water doesn't just feed plants, it actually activates soil life, improves root development, and unlocks nutrients already trapped in your soil. The secret here isn't magic, it's really just biology. Why does rice water work when fertilizers don't? Well, rice water is rich in these soluble starches, trace minerals, and mild sugars. Now, these aren't direct plant nutrients in the traditional sense. Instead, they feed beneficial microbes living all around plant roots. Once those microbes multiply, they convert existing organic matter and minerals into forms plants can actually absorb. This is exactly why rice water often produces better results than synthetic fertilizer. Fertilizer, you see, feeds the plant temporarily. Rice water, on the other hand, feeds the system that keeps feeding the plant continuously. When soil biology is active, plants grow faster, stronger, and larger, often dramatically so. The forgotten survival tools that never needed batteries. Before lithium cells, solar chargers, and plastic housings promised convenience, survival really depended on tools that worked every single time, in any weather, with no switch to fail and no power to drain. History is honestly unambiguous on this point. When conditions turned hostile and supply lines collapsed, the tools that kept people alive were simple, mechanical, and brutally reliable. They survived mud, cold, neglect, and misuse because, frankly, they had to. Many of those tools have quietly disappeared from modern kits, not because they stopped working, but because they stopped selling. And this matters because emergencies strip technology down to the fundamentals. Batteries die in cold, electronics fail under moisture, complexity just creates fragile points. The older tools were designed around human strength, gravity, friction, and fire. They asked more of the user, but they gave certainty in return. Understanding them isn't just nostalgia, it's preparation rooted in evidence. Why did battery-free tools dominate real survival situations? Armies, explorers, and frontier communities learned early that power dependence was a liability. In the Arctic, early polar expeditions abandoned electrical devices almost immediately. In jungle warfare, radios failed long before boots did. During sieges, famine, and long isolation, anything requiring resupply became dead weight. Tools that converted human effort into predictable results endured because they aligned with the realities of survival rather than convenience. The forgotten tools were rarely glamorous. They didn't promise speed or comfort. They promised continuity. As long as the user remained capable, the tool functioned. That design philosophy is what modern survival advice often overlooks. Fire-starting tools that worked in wind, rain, and exhaustion were, well, absolutely essential. The flint and steel set, for example, remained in military and civilian use long after matches existed, and for good reason. Unlike matches, it did not degrade with moisture or time. And unlike lighters, it did not rely on pressurized fuel or seals. With just a bit of practice, it produced sparks indefinitely. Soldiers carried them because they worked after immersion, freezing, and rough handling. Char cloth, fungus, or processed plant fibers paired with flint systems allowed fire even when tinder was scarce. The method required patience and skill, but it removed dependency. In modern terms, it replaced battery reliance with muscle memory. Those who practiced it carried fire-making capability for decades in a pocket-sized kit. Manual navigation tools that never went dark were, honestly, the backbone of reliable travel. The magnetic compass and paper map were not backups, they were primary tools. They required understanding rather than power. When soldiers operated at night without revealing their position, they adapted maps with low visibility techniques, tracing routes by touch or faint reflection rather than light. These methods were slower, but they worked under blackout conditions where electronics would betray or fail the user. Mechanical odometers, pace counting, and terrain association formed navigation systems that functioned even when visibility dropped to nothing. Modern GPS devices offer speed, but when batteries fail or signals vanish, the user without analog skills becomes lost immediately. The battery-free tools demand training, but they never stop working. Water procurement tools built around physics, not filters, were the difference between survival and desperation. Before disposable filters and pump systems, people relied on boiling, sedimentation, and cloth filtration. Metal containers, often steel or tin, were essential survival tools because they allowed purification through heat. Fire and metal solved what technology later complicated. Gravity-based filtration using sand, charcoal, and cloth removed particulates and improved taste. While not sterile by modern laboratory standards, these systems kept people alive long enough to matter. More importantly, they could be built anywhere with local materials. There was nothing to clog permanently or break irreparably. So, hand tools that replaced entire supply chains. Let's talk about that for a moment. Axes, adzes, and handsaws. These were real survival multipliers. With them, shelters could be built, fuel processed, and food accessed, all with just a bit of skill and effort. These tools, they required maintenance, not replacement. A sharpened blade restored function indefinitely, really. There were no proprietary parts and, no compatibility issues to worry about. Military units in prolonged operations often trusted personal edge tools more than issued equipment, not because the issued gear was poor, but because personal tools were known quantities. The user understood them intimately, and that familiarity, in a way, replaced technological dependency. Light sources that worked without electricity included oil lamps, candles, and carbide lamps, which offered controlled light without the need for batteries. These options were, predictable and repairable. A candle could be divided, shielded, and rationed as needed. Oil lamps would burn whatever fuel was available at the time. Carbide lamps, which were used extensively in mining and military engineering, produced steady light and heat by means of a simple chemical reaction. Now, these systems didn't really offer much in the way of brightness or convenience. What they did offer was reliability. They also taught discipline, because light had to be managed carefully. That discipline itself, honestly, was a survival advantage. The reason these tools were abandoned wasn't really about performance, but rather the shift was driven by logistics and economics. Mass production, you see, favored disposables. Training time was reduced as a result. Electronics promised to replace skill with hardware. For short-term use, they did succeed. But for long-term survival, the trade-offs became, pretty obvious. Modern tools are optimized for convenience in stable systems, while historical tools were optimized for uncertainty. That difference, in fact, explains why older methods still persist quietly among professionals who expect systems to fail. So, how do you actually apply this knowledge today? Well, relearning battery-free tools starts with accepting slower methods. Practice firemaking without accelerants, try navigating without screens, carry metal containers instead of those collapsible plastics. Choose tools that can be repaired, sharpened, or improvised rather than simply replaced. The goal here isn't to reject modern gear, but to create redundancy rooted in history. When technology works, use it. When it fails, skill and simple tools can take over without panic. The forgotten survival tools were not primitive at all. They were refined through failure, tested under pressure, and kept precisely because they worked. They never needed batteries because they never depended on systems outside the user's control. If you value this kind of historically grounded survival knowledge, do consider subscribing to the channel and share this with others who understand that real preparedness begins long before the power goes out.